Go ahead, you got it. You have the floor, Sister Diane.
Okay. Okay. Greetings, everyone. Today, we're doing the reading from chapter 2, which is Race First and Self-Reliance. And the format that I wanted to take today was, I started actually to compile a group of questions along with a chronological chart of all the dates and events that was touched on in chapter 1, but I didn't complete all those questions. So what we're doing today is focusing on chapter 2. And then before the weekend, I will provide the group with the questions that pertains to chapter 1 and chapter 2. And next week, the hope is to do a comprehensive review of chapter 1, chapter 2, and if time permits, touch on chapter 3. So we're not going to worry about chapter 1 question today. We're just going to do chapter 2. And then I suppose if we have time, we could hit chapter 3 as well. But the idea for next week is going to be probably we'll use the whole time to do the question since we're doing 2 chapters and possibly touching on 3 tonight. So with no further ado, if anyone wants to volunteer to read tonight, that'll be fine. If not, I can read it again, but if anyone would like to volunteer, the floor is yours. Don't all rush at once. So if I don't have any volunteer, is everyone's off mute as far as volunteering, Brother John?
Everyone is muted, but they do have the ability to come off mute. If anyone would like to volunteer to read, please come off mute.
I'll volunteer.
Thank you, brother.
Okay. All right.
In a world of wolves, one should go
Brother
on.
Art, Brother Art.
Yeah.
If you could start us out, just state the chapter number and chapter title.
Okay. All right. I was late, so I thought that was already done. Okay, chapter 2. Race First and Self-Reliance.
Sorry, Brother Art, I didn't mean to mute you. Brother Art, you're on mute. One other protocol, we didn't do our official open, so I'll take care of the open. Then, Brother Art, you have the floor to read the chapter and get and start. If everyone would, please come off mute. Put your black fist in the air. Repeat after me. One God.
One God.
One God.
One aim.
One aim.
One destiny.
One destiny.
All right, race first. Meeting is open. Brother Art, you have the floor.
Okay, all right. Race First and Self-Reliance, Chapter 2. In a world of wolves, one should go armed. And one of the most powerful defensive weapons within the reach of Negroes is the practice of race first in all parts of the world. Some Garvey quote. What we believe, the Universal Negro Improvement Association advocates the unity and blending of all Negroes into one strong, healthy race. It is against miscegenation and race suicide. It believes that the Negro race is as good as any other and therefore should be as proud of itself as they are. It believes in the purity of the race and the purity of the white race. It is against rich Blacks marrying poor whites. It is against rich or poor whites taking advantage of Negro women. It believes in the spiritual fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man. Marcus Garvey. Okay. Marcus Garvey, unlike his major rivals in the United States, built a mass organization that went beyond mere civil rights agitation and protest and based itself upon a definite, well thought out program that he believed would lead to the total emancipation of the race from white domination. Central to the ideological basis underpinning Garvey's program was the question of race. For Garvey, the Black man was universally oppressed on racial grounds, and any program of emancipation would have to be built around the question of race first. The race became a political entity which would have to be redeemed against the rivals' suggestions that humanity and not the Black race should be the objects of his zeal. He argued that it is not humanity that was lynched, burned, Jim Crowed, or segregated, but Black people. The primacy of race characteristics of the UNIA from its beginnings in Jamaica, and by 1919, United States government officials were drawing attention to what they considered this subversive doctrine. Garvey went about the task of converting the disabilities of the race into a positive tool of liberation with a thorough aggressiveness. No man can convince me contrary to my beliefs, he declared, because my belief is founded upon the hard and horrible experience, not a personal experience, but a racial experience. The world has made being Black a crime, and I have felt it in common with men who suffer like me. And instead of making it a crime, I hope to make it a virtue. According to the consciousness of Garvey followers, according to the consciousness of Garvey's followers was saturated with the new doctrine. Black dolls were manufactured for Black children. Garvey's newspaper proclaimed itself the Negro world. He encouraged his followers to support their Black businessmen and professionals. The race
catechism
used by his followers disabused the minds of Black folks concerning the claims of the Hamitic oath or Hamitic myth by explaining that contrary to this myth, Black people were certainly not the recipients of any biblical curse. He frowned upon advertisements of racially demeaning nature. The Negro world sponsored beauty contests and published photographs of Black women, a subject on which Garvey waxed poetic, Black queen of beauty, though has given color to the world. Indeed, politically, every aspect of the organization was designed to bolster the Black man's self-esteem and to foster pride in self. The primacy of the race in Garvey's thought was coupled with a deep permission concerning the future of the Black man in America. He believed that the Black man with increasingly ample education opportunities, would aspire to positions of influence, which would bring him into direct competition with the white power structure. Within 50 to 100 years, he predicted, such confrontation would lead to a racial clash which would end disastrously for the Black race. This analysis led Garvey to inevitably in the direction of racial separation. His economic virtues in the United States amounted to an attempt toward a nucleus of a self-sustaining and therefore self-employing Black race in America. But his gaze looked more longingly towards Africa as the salvation of the African abroad. Even in Africa, though, he found some European overlords attempting to increase the seeds of future racial discord, as in 1938, when he protested British consideration of a proposal to resettle European Jews in Tanzania, Kenya, or British Guyana. Garvey's concern over the salvation of the race led him to harsh criticism of any weaknesses he perceived among Black people. And there was nothing that displeased him more than the Black man who did not think in racial terms. Such criticism brought out the finest of his invective, yes, to an Uncle Tom Negro. Yes, a yes boss Negro, a howdy massa Negro, a yes Mass Charlie Negro, a Negro who will be satisfied to blacken a white man's shoes all the days of his life and lick the white man's spittle if he orders him to do so. Garvey's race-first doctrine found excellent expression in his acute awareness of the role of culture and the tool for liberation. He himself was a prolific poet of liberation. Indeed, his poems are as good a source of his ideology as any. They were replete with such themes as the beauty of the Black woman, the need for self-reliance, the glories of African history, the necessity for an end to Black participation in the white wars, and protests at the Italian invasion of Ethiopia. This experimentation with the arts for purposes of politicizing the UNIA membership was also endorsed in by one of Garvey's closest associates, John Edward Bruce. One Bruce play, Preaching versus Practice, expressed Garvey's hostility towards unscrupulous Black preachers. Another white one provides an excellent example of the use of this medium for political education. The main characters were the Sinabundo, Ajay, an African UNIA diplomat, and three young ladies, one each from Martinique, the British West Indies, and Afro-American, all of whom were in love with the hero who was leaving for Nigeria on UNIA organizational business. In between the romantic escapades, the audience was treated to monologues extolling the virtues of the UNIA. The set was liberally decorated with the red, black, and green of the UNIA. and the hero and the lady of his choice eventually announced their intention to be married in a Liberty Hall in Africa. Garvey himself indulged in political play writing. His coronation of the African king was performed at the Edelweiss Park headquarters in Jamaica in 1930. The three-act play included scenes from New York, Washington, Paris, London, the West Indies, Ashanti, Dahomey, Senegal, and the Sudan. One scene showed the French premier and British Prime Minister David Lloyd George conferring over UNIA penetration into his Africa. Another featured Black voices delivering stirring oratory against a backdrop of African freedom fighters engaged in bloody struggle with French usurpers in the Sudan. The whole play was conceived as a dramatization of the results of UNIA propaganda since 1918. Such cultural activity was widely indulged in throughout the UNIA. The Dominican division had a literary club. The Black Cross Nurses in Norfolk, Virginia, in 1922 staged an African Convention, a play which was full of race pride and was staged to enthuse the public on the aims of the UNIA and ACL. In Newport News, Virginia, at the same time, the juvenile Black Cross Nurses and Boy Scouts put on a short play, Coming Home to Africa. In New York, the UNIA Dramatic Club performed the great race drama, Talaboo, designed to interpret the ideas of the Great Association. The Philadelphia division sponsored The New Negro, described as a genuine Negro melodrama. The Negro world committed on this play. The old Uncle Tom type is shown as a servant of the to honor Marcus Garvey, while the new Negro stands up man to man and the son of Marcus Garvey and demands an equal break with other races. Garvey's heyday in the 1920s coincided with the African American literary effervescence known as the Harlem Renaissance. For the race and Afro-conscious of which Garvey himself was in no small way responsible. Indeed, some of the most important artists of the Renaissance were associated with the UNIA. Claude McKay was a Garvey supporter and a regular contributor to the Negro world in this early period. Eric Waldron was a Negro world editor, and Zora Neale Hurston was a columnist for the paper. Negro world readers were treated to excellent book reviews by editors William H. Ferris, Eric Waldron, and Herbert H. Harrison. Yet Garvey could not uncritically accept the exoticism and exaggerated negritude which sometimes characterized writers of the period. He accordingly joined in the chorus of criticism against Claude McKay's Home to Harlem. Writing from France, he disapproved strenuously of Black writers who were prostituting their intelligence under the direction of the white man to bring out and show up the worst traits of our people. He considered McKay's book a damnable libel against the Negro, and
Postulated.
What was it?
Postulated, yeah.
Okay. Postulated his conception of the type of artists the race needed. We must encourage our Black authors who have character, who are loyal to their race, who feel proud to be Black, and in every way let them feel that we appreciate their efforts to advance our race through the healthy and decent literature. The Negro world is, in similar vein, took County Cullen, another luminous of the Harlem Renaissance, to task. The paper deployed the fact that a Harvard graduate could overdo the Negritude idea to the extent of writing, "Not yet has my heart or head in the least way realized it, and I were civilized." Wow. During UNIA international conventions in New York and Jamaica, a literary censor was recommended who would safeguard Black people from material unfavorable to the race. During the latter half of the 1930s, Garvey increasingly focused his attention on Paul Robeson, the leading Black motion picture actor of the period. Garvey paid due homage to Robeson's artistic ability, but did not like the spectacle of the foremost Black dramatic personality of the age being cast in several roles calculated to demean Black folk. Robeson was reported in 1929 to be projected star of a satire on Garvey's career, written by two authors, Wallace Thurman and Willard Rapp, known for their sensationalism of Harlem's seamier side. Whether this had anything to do with the Garvey attitude is unclear. The play was to be titled Jeremiah the Great. At any rate, in 1935 found Garvey denouncing Robeson's appearance in such well-known stage and motion picture productions as Emperor Jones, Sanders of the River, The Stevedore. Readers of Garvey's Black Man magazine were informed that Paul Robeson, the Negro actor, has left London for Hollywood. He has gone there to make another slanderous picture against the Negroes. The point was made that in the days gone by, any Black man who succeeded in the white man's circles was automatically lionized. That day should be no more. The hope was expressed that Robeson was now making sufficient money so that when he retires from the stage, he may be able to square his conscience with his race by doing something good for it. In 1937, Garvey protested the British Broadcasting Company Corporation against anti-Black programs and the British Moving Picture Board against Robeson's films. While in 1939, 1 year before his death, he actually published a critical pamphlet aimed at Robeson's films. Robeson withdrew from Hollywood the same year for the same reason contained in Garvey's criticism. Garvey's concern with the racial implications of culture embraced also vaudeville. And UNIA owned two Follies companies in Jamaica. The various UNIA choirs and bands, such as the Universal Jazz Hounds of Jamaica, UNIA, and sports, where Garvey expressed keen interest in the wider implications of the Joe Louis versus Max Schmeling bouts of the late 1930s. Outstanding Black talent in the field was always welcome at the Liberty Hall. Women's Day at the 1922 convention featured Marian Anderson of Philadelphia, billed as America's greatest contralto soloist. Garvey's doctrine of the race first was severely tested by the presence within the race of large numbers of persons of mixed African and Caucasian origin. He took the position that there is no bittersweet among us Negroes because of the cast of color than there is between any other peoples, not excluding the peoples of India. He even asserted that prejudice within the race probably exceeded the directed against the race by alien races. The position brought Garvey into serious ideological conflict with middle-class leaders in the United States and the West Indies. Conflict with the middle-class leaders, many of whom were themselves of lighter hue. Such a position was particularly hostile in the United States, where integrationist leaders such as W.E.B. Du Bois argued that this problem either did not exist or was relatively minor in the United States, and that Garvey, because of his West Indian background, was erroneously importing this feature of island society into the African American scene that he did not understand. Garvey had indeed come out of the West Indian society so stultified by exaggerated three-tiered system of white, brown, black social stratification. And he himself regularly discussed the problems from at least as early as 1913. His Jamaican daily, The Black Man, editorialized in 1929, some people are afraid, some annoyed, and others disgusted that we, as they say. That's okay. Raise the color question. The question has long ago been raised and put into vindictive operation. The color question is the one and only reason that we cannot find a Black girl or boy in store or office in this city. When we, to our certain knowledge, intelligent ones among them, have been refused at places filled with half illiterate brown and mulatto girls and boys, affecting the attitude of supporters in behavior. There's going to be fair play in this country yet. The Black man is on the job and soon will blacken some of these stores and offices beyond recognition. As the editorial suggests, even in Jamaica, where the color caste distinctions were acute, the tendencies of brown class was to deny its existence, much as Du Bois and African American integrationists did. But Garvey was relentless in his attempts to bring the issue to the surface. This hypocritical cry of peace, peace, when there is no peace, is ruinous to the peace and harmony of a society. he declared. We deny the existence of a condition that is woven into the warp and woof of the fabric of our social and public life. We refuse to admit the presence of a feature in our national life, the inescapable results of those insidious workings cause delay, irritation, and annoyance. We rave against, we forbid, we threaten those who dare to refer to the evident, the patent facts that their glaring results, while the whole man is levied to the permeated with the evils of color and distinction, we cry out for harmony and peace. We are, to use a vulgar phrase, a bunch of cheats. We are dishonest, immoral, liars, and hypocrites. This type of assault is entrenched privilege, brought Garvey a death threat from a self-styled Jamaican secret society of colored men, which considered him a black swine. The Afro-American, too, Garvey observed his preference among employers for light-skinned people as clerks, waitresses, etc., and newspapers full of advertisements for skin whiteners, often couched in the crudest possible language. Added to this, he discovered that New York, Boston, Washington, and Detroit, the Blue Vein Society, and the Colonial Club, the West Indian Lights, formed by the Colonial Club, and the American Lights by the Blue Vein Society. These attitudes extended into the churches. It would appear then that Garvey, as one of his supporters pointed out, did not appeal to intra-race color prejudice in the United States, but rather revealed it. Despite the similarities of the course, the situation in America, where the majority did not need the support of the buffer mulatto element to the same extent as the white minority in the islands, was not as serious as the West Indies. Garvey was fully aware of this. The situation in America was serious enough to warrant exposure and attack. But in the West Indies, it nearly approximated a rigid caste structure. Garvey himself pinpointed this difference better than any other of his critics. Can somebody pick up? I gotta blow my nose here.
I can pick up if you want.
Okay.
Okay. In terms of Negro, we include all those persons whom the American white man includes in this appellation of his contempt and hate. The contents of the terms are much reduced in Jamaica and the West Indies, but it carries no less reprobation against the persons. The great curse of our Jamaican communal life is the failure of the hybrid population to realize their natural and correct identification. So whereas the UNIA in the United States numbered amongst its rank people of all colors, excluding whites, and business and professional people, in addition to the great mass of workers and peasants, in Jamaica, it was largely confined to the humbler sections of humanity. This led Garvey to surmise that God seems to have saved from the bottom upwards. Garvey's experience with the light skin element, both in the West Indies and America, led him to be hostile toward those who seemed to portray the supercilious attitude he abhorred. It led him to consider miscegenation to be an evil which should not be perpetuated. We are conscious of the fact that slavery brought upon us the curse of many colors within our race, but that is no reason why we ourselves should perpetuate the evil. The doctrine of the race first had various implications for Garvey's attitude towards white people. It meant, first of all, the exclusion of white people from membership in the UNIA and affiliated organizations. Whites were also prevented from holding shares in Garvey's economic undertakings. His desire to build racial self-reliance led logically to the rejection of white financial philanthropy. In reply to a suggestion by a white reporter in 1921 that certain Negrophiles in Massachusetts might be prevailed upon to contribute to the UNIA, Garvey replied, "We do not want their money. This is a Black man's movement." Race first meant, however, not only race first for Black people, but for other races as well. As far as Garvey was concerned, white people of whatever political persuasion put race before all other considerations. Accordingly, he often preferred an honest expression of racism to the possibly transparent smiles of the philanthropist. He looked at the honest expression of racism as a blessing in disguise because it forced the Black man into heightened racial consciousness, whereas the camouflage variety could lull him into a sense of false security. Commenting in 1917 on the great stride, he wrote, "The honest prejudice of the South was sufficiently evident to give the Negro of America the real start, with a race consciousness, which I am convinced is responsible for the state of development already reached by the race." Thus he could say, we have to admire the white man who fixed the Bible to suit himself, and who even fixed tradition itself, telling us that everything worthwhile and beautiful was made by the white man, that God is a great white man, that Jesus was a white man, and that angels, etc., whatever they are as beautiful as peaches in Georgia. By the same token, however, he saw white self-interest as largely detrimental to Black self-interest. And within the confines of a country such as the United States, where white formed a large ruling majority, white racial self-interest would tend inexorably towards extermination of the Black minority. These considerations strengthened Garvey's commitment to racial separation. Despite the fact that Garvey would not accept white philanthropy or allow whites to join his organization, it did not follow that he could not work to a limited extent with white people. In fact, by maintaining an independent Black power base, he had more freedom to work with or support widely different types of white persons and organizations on specific projects or for limited objectives than some of his contemporaries who were straitjacketed in interracial organizations. The first category of white people with whom Garvey would cooperate were certain types of radicals, usually those engaged in anti-colonial, anti-imperialist, or anti-racist struggles. Often they were leaders of mass movement like his own, and he could identify them as kindred spirits. Among persons in this category were Eramon de Valeria, the Irish leader, who on one occasion was listed as a featured speaker at Garvey's Harlem Liberty Hall, and the Russian revolutionaries, Lenin and Trotsky. He often had a good word for historical figures such as John Brown, Elijah Lovejoy, and others of abolitionist inclination. He also had great admiration for Captain A.A. Cipriani, white leader of Trinidad's Working Men's Association, TWA, whose public career largely coincide with Garvey's in time and political outlook. Cipriani had become head of the TWA in 1919 at the invitation of the members who were Black. By this time, the association had already become a Garveyite stronghold in Trinidad, and its struggles were being reported in the Negro world. Many of his meetings were held in Port of Spain Liberty Hall, and its second in command, W. Howard Bishop, as well as other members of its hierarchy, were prominent Garveyites. Garvey corresponded with Cipriani, who made representation to the British government in 1937 to change their intention of barring Garvey from entering into the island. Another well-known white radical from whom Garvey seemed to have had some respect was Nancy Cunard, a renegade member of a wealthy shipping family who became involved in a variety of Black causes. In 1932, Cunard visited Jamaica to gather materials for his Negro anthology and was the guest at a reception arranged by Garvey. If Garvey could associate with some radical whites of the left in defiance to their anti-imperialist stance or reputation as leaders of the masses, he could also associate, for different reasons, with segregationists on the far right. These latter shared one very critical ideological tenet with Garvey. They too believe in the race first and therefore in the separation of the races. Despite Garvey's limited agreement with some white persons, however, the insistent Black nationalist thrust of UNIA ensured the hospitality of the majority of whites. One white lady witnessing a UNIA parade on 125th Street in Manhattan in 1920 is said to have tearfully exclaimed, "And to think the Negroes will get their liberty before the Irish." Garvey's race-first doctrine was essentially a stratagem to ensure self-reliance and equality for the downtrodden African race. Unlike the white preachers of this doctrine with whom he collaborated, he did not go a step further and preach racial superiority. He more than once stressed that all beauty, virtue, and goodness are the exclusive attributes of no one race. All humanity have their shortcomings, hence no statement of mine at any time must be interpreted as a wholesale praise of or attack upon any race, people, or creed. Self-reliance was a necessary corollary to race first. In his earliest extent pamphlet, Garvey explained in terms showing the probable influence of Booker T. Washington that the Negro is ignored today simply because he has kept himself backward. But if he were to try to raise himself to a higher state in the civilized cosmos, all the other races would be glad to meet him on the plane of equality and camaraderie. He went on to express an idea which would later cause him much enmity from Afro-American integrationists. It is indeed unfair to demand equity when one of himself has done nothing to establish the right to equality. Garvey never abandoned his dual tendency to score the white race for its injustice while simultaneously utilizing the language of condemnation to spur the Black race on to greater self-reliance.
Want me to pick it up?
Sure.
Garvey's belief in the necessity for self-reliance led him occasionally to speak in the language of social Darwinism. He attacked the pseudo-scientific racists who tried to justify genocide against Black people in terms of the Darwinism survival of the fittest, and turned their arguments to the cause of racial self-reliance. White philosophers, he argued, Darwin, Locke, Newton, and the rest, forgot that the monkey would change to a man, his tail would drop off, and he would demand his share. And not only had these philosophers been mistaken, but Black heroism in World War I had finally given the lie to such false assumptions. He reminded his Black audience that the theory has been exploded in the World War. It was you, Superman, that brought back victory in the Marne. The urgency Garvey felt for racial independence and self-reliance led him to argue in the independent endeavor lay the only hope of eventual solution to the problem of race prejudice. The right race would feed this aggressiveness toward the Blacks when it was met by independent Black power of a magnitude equal to his own. White prejudice was manufactured not because there is a difference between us in religion or color, but because there is a difference between us in power. Furthermore, Garvey believed that the Black man had little chance in this matter. If he did not continue going forward, spurred on by his own efforts, then he would slide backwards into slavery and even extermination. The days of slavery are not gone forever. He reminded his followers, slavery is threatened for every race and nation that remains weak and refuses to organize its strength for its own protection. The most important area of existence of independent effort was economic. Garvey believed, like Washington before him, that economics was primary. Successful political action could only be founded on an independent economic base. After the people have established successful and firm industrial foundation, he wrote, they will naturally turn to politics and society, but not first to society, then politics, because the two latter cannot exist without the former. Within months of his arrival in the United States in 1916, Garvey was already appraising with approval the efforts of African Americans had made in the economic field. At this early period, before he had made his decision to remain in the United States, he wrote in a vein having prophetic implications for his own career, the acme of American Negro enterprise is not yet reached. You have still a far way to go. You want more stores, more banks, bigger enterprises. I hope that your powerful Negro press and the consciousness element among your leaders will continue to inspire you to achieve. This desire for economic self-reliance dominated Garvey's thought. The fact that the Black man was consumer and not independent producer worried him. Let Edison turn off his electric lights, and we are in the darkness in Liberty Hall in 2 minutes. He once said, the Negro is living on borrowed goods. Garvey made a valiant attempt to change the state of affairs between 1918 and the early 1920s. Garvey's headquarters area in New York City sprouted a large assortment of UNIA businesses. The Black Star Line was incorporated in 1919. Negro Factories corporations followed not long afterwards. Under its aegis, many appeared universal laundries and universal millinery stores, universal restaurants, universal grocery stores, as well as a hotel, tailoring establishment, a doll factory, and printing press. In addition, the UNIA in New York had, by the first half of 1920, acquired 3 buildings, 1 lot, and 2 trucks, and its weekly organ, the Negro World, was already well established. By 1922, Garvey was even contemplating a large bank. By 1920, more than 300 persons were employed by the UNIA and its allied corporations in the United States. And between 1920 and 1924, UNIA and allied employees on occasion exceeded 1,000 in the United States alone. The effort at self-reliance is well illustrated by the status of the Negro Factories Corporation in mid-1922. There were 3 grocery stores. Cooperative buying for all stores and restaurants was done by 1 manager, thus keeping prices competitive with the white-owned enterprises, such proliferating in Harlem. The Universal Grocery Store number 1, 47 West 135th Street, the manager reported minorities of white customers. Grocery store number 2, 646 Lennox Avenue, between 142nd and 143rd Streets, was reported doing all right, despite being surrounded by white competition. Store 3 at 552 Lennox Avenue and 138th Street was said to be the most flourishing of the 3. It included a meat, fish, and poultry market, said to be the only one of its kind in Harlem. It also boosted the first Black butcher in Harlem. The groceries featured such foods as West Indian yams, pigeon pig, peas, eddles, pumpkins, and plantains, the southern sweet potatoes, and cane syrup. Universal Restaurant number 1 was situated in Liberty Hall at 138th Street. Its seating capacity of 50 was being increased to 100. Mrs. Murray Lawrence, a food chemist and former hospital dietitian, presided over the food preparation. Restaurant number 2 at 75th West 135th Street was smaller and still new and facing competition from 8 other eating places in the same block. The corporation's Beehive printing plant at 2305 7th Avenue was described as doing the bulk of Harlem's jobs and magazine printing. At 62 West 142nd Street, was situated at the corporation's Universal Mart of Industry, which housed a variety of enterprises. These included the Universal Steam and Electric Laundry, which employed 2 delivery trucks, the Men's Manufacturing Department, which made UNIA uniforms, insignia, and the like, and the Women's Manufacturing Department, and Bazaar, which made Black Cross nurses' uniforms, Panama hats, and other millinery, shirts and ties. Plans were afoot for the Universal Catalog and mail order business, and indeed, nurses' uniforms were already available on a mail order basis. Presiding over the Negro factories and corporations at the time, employing about 75 people, was Ulysses S. Poston, UNIA Minister of Industries and the former editor of the Black Detroit Contender. Because of his position, Poston found himself called upon to act as an unofficial advisor to Harlem's businesses in general. During May 1922 alone, he reported the UNIA Department of Labor and Industries had received at least 40 visits from Harlem businessmen who wanted the UNIA to bail them out. In addition to the parent body in Harlem, local branches of the UNIA owned considerable amounts of property and sometimes launched into local business ventures. The encouragement of local businesses was in fact a prime motive for the enterprise's establishment in Harlem by Garvey. These efforts were often successful. In 1927, for example, several years of financial assault on the organization and 2 years after Garvey's incarceration His attorney stated that the organization still owed assets, usually real estate, valued at $20,000 in Philadelphia, $30,000 in Pittsburgh, $50,000 in Detroit, and $30,000 in Chicago. Among other places, local units outside the United States participated in such economic activity also. The Cologne, Panama, UNIA, for example, ran a cooperative bakery, while the Kingston, Jamaica branch ran a laundry, and the African Community League People Cooperation Bank, and shares of which were open only to UNIA members. The individual business enterprises established by UNIA branches all over the world were to be linked, according to Garvey's grand design, into the worldwide system of Pan-African economic corporations. Such a trading community, when fully developed, would be so large that the economies of scale generated would enable it to thrive even in the face of hostilities from the rest of the world. Garvey summed up this idea thus: Negro producers, Negro distributors, Negro consumers, and the world of Negroes can be self-contained. We desire earnestly to deal with the rest of the world, but if the rest of the world desires not, we seek not. The Black Star Line, and later the Black Cross Navigation and Trading Company, was to be the courier for the Pan-Africanist trade. Garvey's attempts to establish economic and self-reliance went beyond cooperative business enterprises. For UNI branches acted as mutual aid friendly societies for the payment of debt and other minor benefits to members. In rural areas, some poor communities, the aspect of organizations' operations assumed greater importance. Local divisions also were required to maintain a charitable fund for the purpose of assisting distressed members or needy individuals of the race. The fund for loans and of honor to be active members, and employment bureau to assist members seeking work. Economic self-reliance, especially on the American scene, acquired special urgency for Garvey, for he foresaw the Depression, which he thought would finish the Black man in America for good. The readjustments of the world, and I have often said, is going to bring about an economic industrial stagnation in America that is going to reduce the Negro to his last position in this nation. The UNIA quest for self-reliance led to sporadic attempts to educational facilities provided by the organization. Garvey's correspondence with Booker T. Washington and his visit to the United States were both motivated by a desire to establish in Jamaica an industrial and agricultural school along with the lines of Booker T. Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. This desire for an educational geared toward independence continuously cropped up. The 1920 Declaration of Rights had demanded unlimited and unprejudiced education for Black people. And the UNIA locals in Port Limon, Costa Rica, Cologne, Panama, British Guyana, and elsewhere ran elementary and sometimes grammar schools. Such schools in Cologne were described 2 months after the inception in 1925 as being along cooperative lines with free tuition for members' children, with an enrollment of more than 300 and staffed by 5 British West Indians and 1 Palestinian teacher. The latter appointed to satisfy a government requirement for a Spanish-speaking teacher. In New York City, the association owned a Booker T. Washington University in the early years, and in 1926, the Association of the United States obtained the Smallwood Quarry Industrial Institute in Claremont, Virginia, afterwards renamed Liberty University. The school was reopened to be on the property adjoining the James River and containing the wharf where the second lot of slaves landed in Virginia in 1622. It was transferred to the UNIA in consideration for assuming its outstanding indebtedness. At the time of its transfer, the school's vice president, J.G. St. Clair Drake, was the UNIA's international organizer, while its principal, Caleb C. Robinson, was a member of the Philadelphia division. Liberty University was acquired among high hopes that it would become a successful vehicle for imparting self-reliance and race pride for rehabilitating Black history. The university, like many other African-American colleges of the period, was in fact a high school standard. And it struggled on for 3 years before being closed in 1929 due to financial difficulty. These students who did not attend, the students who did attend were often sponsored by the local UNIA units and were dedicated Garveyites. In addition to its formally organized schools, the UNIA throughout its history organized in-service training courses of various kinds. During Garvey's American period, for example, the organization carried out such programs for its civil servants. And ex-schoolmaster James O'Malley wrote a special guidebook for prospective UNIA officers. During Garvey's last years in London, he organized a school of African philosophy, which by means of correspondence courses, as well as intensive courses administered by Garvey himself in Canada, prepared UNIA workers for their roles in the organization. This insistent UNIA thrust for self-reliance can best be summarized in Garvey's own words. The Universal Negro Improvement Association teaches to our race self-help, self-reliance, not only in one essential, but in all these things that contribute to human happiness and well-being. The disposition of the many to depend upon other races for a kindly and sympathetic consideration of their needs without making effort to do so for themselves has been the race's outstanding disgrace by which we have been judged and through which we have created the strongest prejudice against ourselves. The race needs workers at this time, not plagiarists, copyists, or mere imitators, but men and women who are able to create, originate, and improve, and thus make the independent racial contribution to the world and civilization. notes.
I don't think you have to
Okay.
make
Thank
any
you.
notes, brother. Thank you, brother. All right, excellent job, Sister Diane.
Yes, so, yes, thank you, Brother Art. That was great. So we normally wrap up at 9:30. So we can wrap up early, or we can get into the next chapter. But we won't be able to finish it. But next week we'll go over all the questions pertaining to the preface to where we are to chapter 2. So if we can end the call, or we can start chapter 3 for everyone. We normally wrap up at about 9:30, correct, Brother John?
We try to. Sometimes, a lot of times, it rolls over past 9:30, but we do try to respect everybody's time.
Okay.
If
Well,
if those are the options, I would recommend to continue to read. There are going to be some very long chapters that we're going to come across, and if for the sake of conserving time and trying to complete the text, I would recommend to continue.
okay. All right. So then we can go on to chapter 3.
Chapter 3, Nationhood. When we as members of the Universal Negro Improvement Association talk about a government of our own in Africa, a flag of our own and national anthem of our own, some Negroes laugh at us, but we have only pity for them, as they know not what they do. When Uncle Sam lynches her black boys with her uniform on their back, and John Bull calls her ex-soldiers aliens who helped her in the Ashanti and Zulu wars to take big slices of Africa, then it is high time for some dull, apathetic Negroes to think in terms of nationhood. We are determined to solve our own problems by redeeming our motherland, Africa, from the hands of alien exploiters, and found these a government, a nation of our own, strong enough to lend protection to the members of our race scattered all over the world, and to compel and respect the nations and races of the earth. Convinced that Black people must seek salvation first as a race, Garvey set himself to the task of doing this through principles of nationhood. He believed that Black people should be brought into one community encompassing the whole Black universe by belonging to this Pan-African community of 400 million. Garvey's critics often took issue with his arithmetic. Black people could rely on the forces of an overwhelming majority, even in areas such as the United States where they were in a minority. The idea of nationhood, like probably all of his major ideas, had already been formulated by Garvey before the UNIA was formed, and evidenced by his activities in the National Club of Jamaica. By the time that the UNIA became operative in the United States, then Garvey could proclaim his disagreement with the limited strategies of his rivals. The UNIA had declared did not speak in the language of theology or religion, not in the language of social reform, but the Universal Negro Improvement Association speaks in the language of building a government, of building political power, and all that goes with it. And all that goes with it. The UNIA did have, indeed, during Garvey's American period, it became a microcosm of the African nation that Garvey hoped to build. In the international conventions beginning in 1920, the UNIA had, in Garvey's words, the greatest legislative assembly ever brought together by the Negro peoples of the world. Issues were aired and debated, usually for the full 31 days of August, and all officers, including Garvey himself, were duly elected. Delegates themselves, usually elected by the UNIA branches and other race organizations, attended from places as far as Australia, Africa, North America, presiding over the organizations from 1920 on a potentate and kind of constitutional monarch. The UNIA Constitution stipulated that the potentate must be an African from the motherland. Garvey himself, an executive head, was given this title of Provincial President of Africa. The Black world was subdivided into several broad geographical regions, each presided over by a leader. The organizations had its own universal Ethiopian anthem, which in 1920 was adopted as the anthem of the Negro race, as well as its own Magna Carta in its Declaration of Rights of the Negro peoples of the world, adopted at the 1920 convention. Garvey himself was bestowed with the title Honorable at its convention. A UNIA civil servant administered its own exams and prepared workers for service in the organization. The UNIA demonstrated the trappings of nationhood too by bestowing titles on deserving members of the race. White as well as Black critics ridiculed the practice, to which Garvey retorted, "I am accused of creating dukes, barons, and knights who gave the white man a monopoly on creating social orders." With similar logic, Garvey insisted on wearing on conventional ceremony uniforms and robes after the fashion of those worn by the leaders of sovereign states. Garvey lived long enough to see the Italian fascists install a Duke of Addis Ababa after their invasion of Ethiopia. He noted that the lack of hostility to this occurrence from those who had ridiculed him in 1924 for appointing John E. Bruce as Duke of the Nile, and external attributes of nationhood were evidenced also in the uniform auxiliaries of the UNIA, such as the Universal African Legions and the Universal Motor Corps and the Universal African Black Cross Nurses, juveniles, and so on. The most extravagant, impressive item of Garvey's nationalist inspired pageantries centered around the court receptions and marked by conventions. Such receptions were conceived as the biggest events in the social life of the Negro peoples of the world. In 1929, receptions was adorned with the nature of the Black Queen of Beauty holding aloft her torch of truth. Among the retinue at such court receptions were Her Majesty Candace and provisional ladies of the Royal Court of Ethiopia of the UNIA. The most enduring of the UNIA's external trappings of nationhood was its flag of red, black, and green, adopted in the 1920 Declarations of Rights as the official colors of the African race. This question of a flag for the race was not as trivial as might have appeared on the surface. For the United States, especially, the lack of African symbols and national nationhood seems to have been the cause for crude derision on the part of whites and a source of sensibility on the part of African Americans. White derisions over deficiency was summed up in a popular American song. Every race has a flag but the coon. A 1912 report appearing in the African Times and Orient Review, for which Garvey worked, documented the far-reaching consequences of this song. Bishop J. Lennox of African Methodist Episcopal Church of Zion in Cleveland, Ohio, had emerged from a theater where the song had been sung to be met by a fist fight between an Irishman and an African American who had objected to the white man's repeating the song. The bishop duly parted and contested the white man's repeating the song. The bishop duly parted contestants, but was moved by the incident to design a flag over the race to remove this source of ridicule. His flag was subsequently endorsed by 85,000, according to our Black people at the convention in Ontario, Canada. The general conclave of the bishop's church also endorsed the flag. The flag was a complicated affair of stars and bars and red, white, and blue, and purple, and was based largely on biblical symbolisms, purpose for Jesus' role. White for the purity of the saints, blue for the loyalty of the Negroes to the United States. The flag itself was apparently not a great success, but the idea lived with Garvey, who was able to translate it into the more meaningful and today's universally adopted red, black, and green. Garvey was, in all probability, familiar with the bishop's article in 1921, he declared. Show me the race or nation without a flag, and I will show you a race of people without any pride. In song and mimicry, they have said, every race has a flag but the coon. How true, but that was said of us 4 years ago. They can't say it now. The race.
Brother Art, Sister Diane, it's 9:33. Did we want to stop?
Okay.
If everyone wants to continue, I guess we could finish chapter 3. And if Brother Art needs some relief, I could continue. It's up to everyone though. If we're in favor of continuing, we can. If not, we can pick it up next week. Is there anyone who doesn't want to continue? For time's sake, for going, for infringing on the schedule, what have you?
Um, I say we can pick it up next week. But let's hear what other people got to say.
Is everyone okay with continuing then, the majority? Okay. Did you want to continue, Brother Art? Do you want me to just finish up?
You can finish it up.
Okay. The race catechism Garveyites use explain the significance of the red, black, and green as red for the color of the blood which man must shed for their redemption and liberty, black for the color of the noble and distinguished race to which we belong, and green for the luxuriant vegetation of our motherland. On at least one occasion, Garvey gave a different explanation for the colors. Here his purpose seems to have been the deliberately alarm his interviewer, Charles Mowbray White, a member of the conservative coalition of business, moderate trade unionist, and professional people known as the National Civic Federation. He told White that red expressed the UNI's sympathy with the reds of the world. The green expressed a similar sympathy for the Irish in their struggle against the British, and the black stood for people of the African race. The nationalist implication of Garvey's flag, like other aspects of Garvey's thoughts, were not confined to Afro-American, but inspired nationalist struggle on the African continent too. Thus, at the charter unveiling ceremony of the UNIA Woodstock Division in Cape Town, South Africa, in 1924, the featured speaker, J.G. Gomes, expressed particular gratitude for the red, black, and green flag, a flag, as he expressed it, of our own. In the next year, the African National Congress, also of South Africa, adopted a gold, black, and green flag, gold for the country's wealth, black for the people, and green for the land. The flag was suggested by a Garvey admirer and influential ANC member, T.D. Miwali Skota. In 1950s, the red, black, and green could seem in Kenya, this time with a shield, arrow, and spear superimposed on it as the flag of Jomo Kenyatta's nationalist Kenya African Union. One of the most important consequences of Garvey's doctrine of nationhood one of the most important consequences of Garvey's doctrine of nationhood was the establishment of representative of the race in strategic areas. To this end, the Declaration of Rights of the Negro people of the world had called upon the various governments of the world to accept and acknowledge Negro representatives who shall be sent to said government to represent the general welfare of the Negro peoples of the world. Just days after the adoption of this declaration, the announcement was made that the UNIA's leader of the American Negroes would take up residence in a black house in Washington, since black people could not elect one of their own to the White House. But even before the declaration and the Black House proposal, which was not implemented, the UNIA had sent commissioners to France, the Paris Peace Conference of 1919. Their lobbying efforts did not succeed in obtaining any abatement in the zeal of the European imperialist powers to seize the ex-German African colonies. Perhaps for those reasons, the 1920s Declaration wrote the League of Nations off as null and void as far as the Negro is concerned, in that it seeks to deprive Negroes of their liberty. Nevertheless, by 1922, the UNIA was ready to try the League again. A delegation consisting of Oxford-trained George O. Mark from Sierra Leone, Professor J.J. Adam from Haiti, who was educated at Tuskegee, William Lee Van Scheril from Afro-American, a graduate, Philander Smith College, Little Rock, Arkansas, and Professor James O'Malley from Jamaica, a former teacher of Calabar College, proceeded to Geneva to lay a petition before the League. The petition requested that ex-German colonies be turned over to Black leadership since Black soldiers had been responsible for their capture. The petition suggested that under Black leadership, they could make good within 20 years. Then 400 million Black people would not be serfs any longer. The delegation arrived in Geneva early in September 1922, secured seat in the Assembly Hall, was admitted to all committee rooms, and met with their director of the mandate section of the League, whom they urged to appoint a Black person to the Permanent Mandate Commission. After lobbying for 3.5 weeks, they were able to interest the Persian delegation in submitting the petition on behalf of the UNIA. The Parisian did so, but by this time, the current session of the League was within 3 days of ending, and the petition was therefore filed away for consideration at the 1923 session. The UNIA delegation succeeded in being seated among the official delegates rather than in the galley where non-official delegates sat. According to a member of the delegation of about 300 similar unofficial delegates attempting to present petitions, only the UNIA representatives succeeded. For the 1923 League session, the UNIA again dispatched a representative in the hopes that the 1922 petition would be debated. This time, the solo delegate was Professor Jean Joseph Adam, a former president of the San Francisco UNIA division and secretary and translator to the 1922 delegation. Now he was upgraded to the rank of first provisional ambassador of the Negro people of the world to France. He would reside in Paris and would lobby in Geneva. He sailed from New York on August 23rd, and on August 24th, the British Consul General of New York City, who kept a close watch on the UNIA, so informed the British ambassador in Washington, who so informed the Foreign Office in London. By the time that Adam got to Europe, the League, probably at the instigation of Britain and France, whose ex-German African territories were the objects of the UNIA race-conscious desires, had quietly thwarted Garvey's plans. They had gotten around the UNIA's assumption of nationality by resolving that all nationals with grievances should present them through their respective governments. As far as Garvey was concerned, of course, the African, whether he lived, wherever he lived, had no government to speak to his interests, and so he should be heard as a race. And the UNIA, with its aspirations to nationhood, represent these racial interests. The petition could hardly have pleased European governments, calling as it did for racial political liberty and recalling the heroic effort of Black soldiers supposedly in the cause of democracy. It showed that all subject people that receive something out of war, except the majority of Africans. Nationhood. We readily appreciate the fact that the League of Nations has taken into consideration the restoration of Palestine to the Jews. Ireland has been given the consideration of a free state government. Egypt had been granted a form of independence, and there is still a great consideration for India, who was represented at the peace conference in Versailles through and by reason of splendid service rendered by Indian soldiers. Garvey issued a renewed petition in 1928 and continued to try to attract the League's attention thereafter, but never came any closer to success than in 1922. The UNIA drive for nationhood did not stop with commissioners to the League of Nations and a provisional ambassador to France. Traveling commissioners were constantly on the move, establishing personal contact with UNIA branches. There were also provisional ambassadors appointed to legislation set up in other places besides France. One such place was Liberia, where a legation was set up in 1921. The resident secretary summed up in duties in a letter to Garvey in the following terms. The oral instructions of Your Excellency, being conceived from the point of view that the post was a diplomatic one, the commiserate a legislation and my position secretary to the legations indicate that I should do all the legation secretary would be expected to do: study the Liberian situation, the people and the government, ferret out all important news about whomsoever and whatsoever, and make confidential report to Your Excellency, direct aside from other reports that I might send to the Council through Your Excellency. In the case of Liberia, I think it was in the case of Liberia.
Yeah, give me 1 second. What did I do?
Okay, there it is. Okay. In the case of Liberia, Garvey had attempted to establish a legation without openly advertising it as such. In January 1924, however, he dispatched an ambassador to Britain amid much fanfare. He had been distressed during his travels in Europe to discover that all people and races residing there had someone who could look after their interests except the Black man. The first UNI ambassador to Britain was Sir Richard Hilton of Hilton Tobit. Tobit, a former African Methodist Episcopal minister and schoolmaster in Bermuda, had attended the 1920 UNIA convention and was one of the signers of the Declaration of Rights. He was elected leader of the Eastern Provinces of the West Indies, and as a result of his refusal to disavow the UNIA, he lost his position in the church and suffered a withdrawal of government support from his school. On his appointment, he was admitted by Garvey to the exclusive order of Knight Commander of the Sublime Order of the Nile, which entitled him to use prefix Sir. He was charged with the task of representing the interests of the Negro people of the world at the courts of St. James. He was to study the political situation in England as it affects the African race. Garvey considered the time propitious. Tobit sailed in January of 1924 because 1924 was a year of Labour Party rule. A Labour government, Garvey surmised, would be less difficult to deal with than aristocratic conservatives, since they should have some sympathy for the aspirations of the mass of people. For this reason, too, Tobit was charged with creating favorable sentiments among the English working class. For as Garvey explained, if you can convince the English working man that he has no cause for complaint against the Negro, it would be impossible for any government in Great Britain to do anything that would affect the interests of Negroes. If English workers refuse to fight, okay, where was I? Refuse to fight, then there was no way that Britain could go to war with the UNIA in Africa. Tobit, like Adam in France, would be provisional ambassador only and would give way when a truly independent Africa began sending ambassador of its own. Garvey, with all the aplomb of the master propagandist, officially informed the British government of the appointment of the Honorable Richard Hilton Tobit as High Commissioner and Minister. I'm not that sure the word is, to the Britannic Majesty government, in a note that read, Honorable Richard Hamilton Tobit is accredited by the Universal Negro Improvement Association to interest himself in all matters affecting the interests of the Negro race within Great Britain. It continued, his credentials have been submitted to His Majesty's Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary, and is hoped that His Majesty's government would accord to him such courtesies as are extended to other representatives of independent race and sovereign people. Upon arrival in England, Tobit requested interviews with the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State of the Colonial Office so that he might present the credentials of the UNIA and ACL. He requests wait, I think you went a little far.
His request precipitated. Yeah.
Okay. Present credential of UNIA. His request precipitated a debate over whether a response should properly come from the British Foreign Officer of the Colonial Office. One colonial office official suggests that it was the business of his department to keep Garvey and his associates out of West Africa, not out of number number 10. Keeping the UNIA out of number 10, the official resident of the British Prime Minister, should be the responsibility of the Foreign Office. Another colonial office official considered the adverse effect of British colonialism in the West Indies, which would flow from any such official recognition of the UNIA. The confidence of the West Indies in HMG, His Majesty's government, would suffer a rude shock if any sort of official recognition were given to this association, which has a record of fraud, sedition, and incitement to violence. Not surprisingly, Tibbet requested for an interview to present his credential, was finally turned down. The High Commissioner, nevertheless, did remain in England for a while, addressing meetings of UNIA branches in Manchester and London. In 1925, as High Commissioner of the Eastern Provinces of the West Indies, he fared much better with the Dutch colony of Suriname, where he was received by the governor and given the freedom of the colony. 1 year before refusing to accept Garvey's high commissioners to the court of St. James, the British government had seriously considered extending the quasi-diplomatic recognition to the Cuban UNIA division. The situation in Cuba was unique. Here, thousands of Black workers, especially Haitians and Jamaicans, the latter British subjects, had for years been recruited to work as laborers on Cuban sugar plantation. In Cuba, these Black workers were ruthlessly oppressed and were afforded particularly no legal protection either by the Cuban government or the British diplomatic personnel. In this situation, the UNIA became firmly entrenched amongst the Black workers in Cuba, and in time became mutual aid society, race uplift organization, and quasi-government for the Black population. It was particularly the only effective attempt to look after their interests. Not surprisingly, by the mid-1920s, Cuba had a large number of UNIA divisions and chapters of any except the United States. Cuba had the largest number of division and chapters of any country except the United States. In this situation, the British minister in Cuba bought the UNIA's ideas of extending semi-official recognition to it as organization protecting the interests of British West Indies workers in Cuba. The Foreign Office okay. Where was I? Are we okay? The British government of Jamaica.
No, one second. I lost it. Yeah, okay. So you just read.
Okay.
You just do
So the
this.
Foreign Office
Yeah, Foreign Office in London.
in London, to whom the suggestion was forwarded, decided to sound out 3 governments of its West Indies colonies before coming to a decision. These governors, all of them well acquainted with the work of the UNIA in their own colonies were mostly hostile to the idea. The governor of Barbados explained that there were but 2 UNIA branches in the island. One of those was composed of more solid men and lacked any distinctly anti-white proclivities, while the other was allegedly very probably disloyal. Semi-official recognition of the Cuban UNIA would give a fillip to the local branches, which might end in headaches for British colonialism. If, however, he replied to the Foreign Office query, the Cuban branch were recognized as the center of protection of the interests of the British West Indies in the country. I foresee that the society would obtain a status in the colony that might be very inconvenient. It would certainly result in a very large increase in membership, and the hotheads in the association would probably be awakened to renewed zeal to stir up trouble between the two races. The Barbadians are generally a quiet, well-behaved body of men, but they are very excitable and easily roused. He further indicated that UNI member.
Sister Diane.
Yes.
It's 10 o'clock. Just time check.
Okay. Okay. All right. So we could stop here and pick up here.
Yeah, we made some good progress. We got about halfway through the 3rd chapter.
Okay.
So we're halfway through page 50. I got it marked for next week. We completed all of chapter 2. So yeah, it's quite a bit of progress.
Okay. So next week then we can go over the questions for the preface up to chapter 2, and then we can pick up where we left off on chapter 3.
That's a good idea.
So thanks everyone for attending today's study session. And if everyone is good, we can go ahead and close out. Brother John, if you want to do the honors.
Well, were you willing to open the floor for questions?
Well, I was thinking that if we're gonna pick up the questions next week, we could do so, since I don't really have all the questions now. But if anyone has any comment or question, otherwise, certainly let's open the floor for that.
Before we close, was there any questions or comments briefly?
Race first.
Race first, Dr. Shams. How you
Race
doing?
first.
Yeah, there's an easier way to do all this reading. It's called speechify.com.
Easier way to read. Understand.
Speechify.com. It's $139 a year, but it's worth it with all the reading that we have to do.
Yeah,
Speechify.com.
we were looking at an Audible version. Sister Diane had mentioned it, but we hadn't.
I actually have Audible, but I'm using my desktop so I can see everything larger, and I'm not sure if I could use the Audible on my phone while I use the phone for the audio. That's why
Speechify is directed towards the computer. Anything that you want to read in your computer, speechify.com, read it verbatim for you. They have both men and women voices. I don't know if they have African American or Black voices, but they have different variety of different things. And it's an automated reading system, and we don't have to labor ourselves trying to read all this here, without that. It's $139 a year, but it's well worth it with all the reading we have to do. Race first.
Race first. Thank you, Dr. Shams. There was one thing that caught my attention. Try to be brief. Okay. Oh my gosh. There was something I thought that was said in regards to a lion in chapter 2. I can't find it though. It was about the entertainers when he was talking about entertainers.
In chapter 2?
Yeah.
About Paul Robeson?
I don't know if it was Robeson, but he was saying something about how it was in relation to black celebrities on a pedestal. But he used a word that I didn't understand, and I was trying to bring to the group. I'll probably have to bring it next week.
Yeah, okay.
I could have sworn it was something like lion, but I'll find it.
You remember the gist of what they were saying?
Not exactly, because it was early. It was very early.
Lioness, I think the word was.
Lionized. That's what it was. Okay, so top of page 27, he said the point was made. Well, let me go there. Yeah, it was after Paul Robeson. Paul Robeson, the Negro actor, has left London for Hollywood. He has gone there to make another slanderous picture against the Negro. The point was made that in days gone by, any black man who succeeded in white circles was automatically lionized. I didn't know what that. It seemed like a pedestal type thing, or admired or idolized type thing.
Yeah, he was considered one of the top actors in the country at that time.
Hmm. Here's
But
name.
he later changed his whole outlook on America because he was labeled a communist, and eventually they tried to lock him up. Him and a couple of other actors. They declared they were the first people to go to the UN and declare that the United States was committing genocide on black people.
Okay. So I mean, lionize would be like give like influence, have political influence or something, giving political.
Yeah, he was as an actor, white people loved him and they praised him. He was a multi-talented guy. He played professional football. He was an opera singer, and he was also an actor, and he could also write and orate. And so he was like on a pedestal, like you said. And then the government came down on him hard. They called him a communist and said that he was all against the government. And he got pissed. And he changed his whole look on America. And I think he did join the Communist Party.
It says to make someone famous or to treat someone as if they were famous.
Yeah.
That's what the definition of lionized is?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so making them famous, yeah. Any black who succeeded in white circles automatically made famous.
Lionized.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. That was all I had. Anyone in closing?
No, that's it.
Excellent job, Sister Diane, Brother Art, in the reading. Look forward to the questions. Yeah, could be a task.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2 chapters.
Okay.
Okay, brothers and sisters, great study session. Brother John, if you'd like, you can close us out.
Not a problem. If everyone would, please put your black fists in the air and repeat after me. One God,
One God,
one aim,
one
one
aim,
aim,
one destiny.
one
One
destiny.
one destiny.
Africa,
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 for the Africans,
for the
for the
Africans,
Africans,
those at home,
those at
those at
home,
home,
and those abroad.
and those
and those abroad.
Race first, family.
Up your mighty
Yes.
race, you can accomplish what you will.
Yes, sir.
Up you mighty race, yes.